In February 1945, a 17-year-old boy named Jack Lucas lay face down in a volcanic trench on the island of Iwo Jima. He wasn't even supposed to be there. 3 years earlier, he had forged his mother's signature to join the Marines at the impossible age of 14. Now, as the black sands around him erupted in machine gun fire, Jack watched as 2 Japanese grenades hissed through the air and landed directly in the center of his squad. Within seconds, those iron shells would shred every man in that trench. But Jack did something that seasoned veterans called insane. He didn't run. He didn't dive for cover. Instead, he pulled a trick that defied human logic and every survival instinct ever programmed into a soldier. What he did next would leave him with 200 pieces of shrapnel in his body and legacy as the youngest Medal of Honor recipient in the Pacific. By August 1942, the world was at its breaking point, and 14-year-old Jack Lucas was tired of waiting. While most boys his age were studying for algebra tests or going to the picture show, Jack was staring at a recruitment poster. He was built like a man, 5'7" and 180 pounds, but on paper, he was just a kid from North Carolina. Jack forged his mother's signature on a set of papers, walked into a recruiting station, and joined the Marine Corps. He didn't just pass training, he excelled at it, eventually becoming a machine gunner. For years, he kept the secret, terrified that someone would notice his smooth face and send him home. But the secret almost came out in early 1945. Jack's unit was preparing to head to the Pacific, but Jack had been relegated to a training cadre in Hawaii. To the young Marine, this was a death sentence for his honor. He decided that if the Marines wouldn't bring him to the fight, he would bring himself to the Marines. He went AWOL, deserting his post not to run away from the war, but to run toward it. Jack stowed away on a troop ship, the USS Duel, hiding under bunk beds and eating scraps for weeks. He finally turned himself in when the ship was well at sea. His commanding officer was so impressed by the kid's sheer determination to fight that he didn't put him in the brig. Instead, he reduced him to private and assigned him to a rifle squad. He had just turned 17. Jack Lucas arrived on the shores of Iwo Jima on D-Day +1. The island was a nightmare of sulfur and ash. The Japanese defenders had dug miles of tunnels into the volcanic rock, turning every hill into a fortress. Within the first hour, Jack realizing that his training hadn't prepared him for the reality of Mount Suribachi. His rifle squad was moving through a ravine when they were pinned down by an interlocking web of fire. The Japanese were virtually invisible, firing from concealed slits in the rock. Jack and 3 of his comrades dove into a shallow trench to catch their breath. Suddenly, the air filled with the sharp metallic tinks of iron hitting stone. 2 Type 97 grenades had been tossed from a tunnel opening just feet above them. They landed in the soft dirt between the 4 Marines. The standard protocol was to roll away or try to kick the grenades back. But there was no space in the narrow trench. If those grenades blew, the whole squad would die instantly. Jack didn't think about his age or his future. He came up with a stupid idea on the spot. He yelled a warning to his team, but instead of diving away, he did the exact opposite. He threw himself forward, grabbing the first grenade and pulling it deep into the soft volcanic sand directly beneath his belly. Then, with his hands, he reached out for the second grenade and pulled it underneath his body as well. He was essentially using his own torso as a sandbag to contain a double explosion. Those grenades had a 4 to 5 second fuse. In that split second, Jack Lucas had transformed from a 17-year-old runaway into a shield for his friends. His squad mates watched in frozen horror as he hunched over the explosives, burying them with his rifle and his own chest. 1 grenade hissed, but it was a dud. It lay cold beneath him, but the second grenade was very much alive. The volcanic sand shifted slightly under Jack's weight. He gripped his M1 Garand rifle, pressing the barrel over the grenades to add even more pressure to the ground. He was essentially trying to force the power of the blast downward, into the earth, rather than outward into his lungs. He didn't pray for survival. He closed his eyes and waited for the end. He knew that even with the rifle in the sand, a grenade detonating against his stomach would likely rip him in half. But the trick worked. By containing the blast within that tiny pocket of sand and steel, he ensured that his squad, men with wives and kids back home, wouldn't even be scratched. In that silence, the second grenade finally blew. The earth beneath Jack bucked like a wild animal. The force of the explosion lifted Jack Lucas off the ground and slammed him back into the trench walls. Smoke filled the ravine as his squad mates scrambled to see what was left of the teenager who had just saved their lives. The scene in the ravine was chaotic. Jack's squad mates, believing him dead, quickly engaged the Japanese soldiers emerging from the tunnel. They fought with a ferocity fueled by the sacrifice they had just witnessed. Jack Lucas lay completely still, his uniform shredded, and his M1 rifle twisted into an unrecognizable shape. But then, one of the Marines noticed a slight movement. A finger twitched in the ash. Against all odds, Jack was breathing. His self-devised trick of burying the grenades and using his rifle to redirect the explosion had somehow preserved his internal organs, though the exterior of his body was devastated. The squad called for a corpsman, but the fire was too heavy. For hours, Jack drifted in and out of consciousness on that black sand. His right arm was mangled, his legs were riddled with shrapnel, and his chest was a mass of punctured flesh. Eventually, a team of medics reached him. They were stunned to find a pulse. When they loaded him onto a stretcher, he was so filled with metal that he literally rattled. He was evacuated to a hospital ship offshore, then through a series of field hospitals across the Pacific. Over the next few months, surgeons worked tirelessly to extract the remnants of the Japanese Type 97 grenade from Jack's body. They removed piece after piece of jagged iron. In total, doctors extracted 200 separate pieces of shrapnel from his arms, legs, and chest. 7 of those pieces were never removed. They were lodged too close to his heart and lungs to risk surgery. He would carry portions of that grenade inside him for the rest of his life. Despite his age and the scale of his injuries, he never complained. He simply asked when he could go back to his squad. His war was over, but his legend was just starting to reach the White House. By the time Jack Lucas was strong enough to stand on his own, the war was nearing its end. On October 5, 1945, the boy who had lied about his age to fight stood on the lawn of the White House. He was barely 7 months past his 17th birthday. President Harry Truman approached the young Marine, who was still wearing bandages under his dress blues. Truman looked at the citation, then at the teenager standing before him. The citation detailed how Jack had single-handedly saved his squad by jumping on 2 grenades at Iwo Jima. "I'd rather have this medal than be president," Truman famously whispered as he hung the Medal of Honor around Jack's neck. Jack Lucas had become the youngest person in World War II to receive the nation's highest award for valor. He had set a record that many believe will never be broken. At an age when most young men were worrying about their high school prom or getting their driver's license, Jack had survived a double grenade blast and saved an entire Marine squad from annihilation. The numbers were staggering: 21 surgeries, 200 pieces of shrapnel, 1 17-year-old underdog, and 0 casualties for his squad. Jack hadn't just used a trick to survive, he had used sheer willpower to prove that the too young kid was actually the strongest man on the island. Jack Lucas lived a full life after the war, but he never truly stopped being a Marine. He eventually rejoined the military, serving as a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division in the 1960s, surviving 2 training paratroop jumps where his chutes failed to open. It seemed that after surviving a grenade to the stomach, even gravity couldn't stop him. But his true legacy isn't found in his post-war jumps or his business career. It lives on in the annals of Iwo Jima and the stories told to every new Marine recruit. Jack Lucas represents the absolute extreme of the underdog spirit. He was too young to sign up, but too brave to back down. When he passed away in 2008 at the age of 80, many noted that he still carried those final pieces of shrapnel from that black sand ravine. They were more than just remnants of war. They were proof of the split-second decision that changed history for his squad. How does a 17-year-old find the courage to pull a stunt like that? Maybe it was because he wasn't thinking like a soldier with a career ahead of him. He was thinking like a kid who refused to let his brothers die. Jack Lucas remains a reminder that the most unconventional tricks aren't found in a manual, but in the heart of the smallest man in the fight.